A lot of people say that Jinx's arc was bad writing, and I keep seeing this take everywhere.
Jinx deserved full villain arc. They ruined her by trying to redeem her. She was so much more cool and interesting in season 1.
And every time I see it, I just think you did not understand the story. You did not understand the setting, and most obviously, you did not understand Jinx. In fact, I would even say that Jinx was never a villain, not even in season 1. In fact, I want to prove to you in this video that she was always the hero, always the main character all along, not Vi. And before you grab your pitchforks and try to burn me,
we have found the witch, may we burn her? Burn her!
I ask that you just hear me out, because by the end of this video, I'm going to make a full, complete argument. Keeping in mind, I am not necessarily a mainstream logical analyst. I am a intuitive, spiritual, philosophical analyst. So we're gonna go deep here.
Bruh.
Editing Umbrella here. Yeah, so I couldn't fit it all in one video, so this is going to be a 2, maybe 3-part series. Sorry. In my last video, I heavily criticized the writing and the writers, but I want to get one thing clear. I do not disagree with the characterizations. I disagree with the politically naive, centrist, and classist framework that the writers wrapped around an otherwise mythologically incredibly deep and innovative story. Don't get me wrong, the fuzzy plotlines and execution in season 2 definitely left something to be desired.
A wolf has no mercy.
A few moments later.
I see your face, deceiver.
And if you're annoyed that Jinx is de-villainized because she actually was justified in her reactions, I get that argument. I have mixed feelings about the love and light message.
Greatest thing we can do in life is find the power to forgive.
But then I would argue, would she even really be a villain under that point of view? In fact, that is my thesis, but I'll be getting into the nuances of all of that in this video. For more of my criticisms of Arcane's writing and the framework, you can watch my last video. That video was about what they got wrong, but this video is what they got exactly, undeniably right. And that is the complex, raw, and deep characterizations, and especially the arc of Jinx. So in this video and the next, I want to explain my position on why I believe Jinx was always the hero, and why Vi was always, I guess you could say, the anti-hero, but even that's not quite right, but I'll get more into this later. And I will show how this interpretation is in fact supported by the writing, especially the subtext. Because what people are calling bad characterizations is not a failure on the part of the writer, but I'm going to be bold here and say it is a failure on the part of the audience for not understanding the depth of their characters that they have shown from the beginning. That it is in fact genius writing with a narrative complexity that has never been done before, and how both Vi and Jinx's arc were perfect. But for this video, we will focus on Jinx and her perfect, excruciatingly beautiful hero arc. Before we even get to Jinx, we need to talk about the thing that changes everything in the story, and it is the very thing that everyone keeps stumbling on and not understanding, arguably even the writers. And that is the context of the setting, the world that Jinx and Vi were born into. This is the foundation for truly understanding the story of Arcane, and really any story. If you don't understand the setting, you can't understand anything else. The very opening scene sets the stage very clearly. Vi and Jinx witness a failed rebellion. They witness Piltover, this city that they're supposed to be citizens of, kill their parents, and witness this institution violently enforce their position as subordinates. The exposition makes it very clear that Piltover is not just a city with problems. It's not a well-meaning institution that got a little corrupt along the way. Piltover is a system that is insidious in its very framework. It is a complete, deliberately constructed system built on extraction. Its wealth, its hex-tech revolution, its entire enlightened aesthetic, all built on the labor, the bodies, and the poisoned lungs and the stolen future of the population it literally constructed itself on top of. I mean, even that of itself is a brilliant metaphor. The city has its wealth because of the people it is literally, physically, even geographically dominating. Zaun is not a separate place. It is part of Piltover. It is Piltover's basement, where Piltover puts everything that they don't want to look at, and what Piltover's progressive image and innovation actually cost. The pollution from Piltover's progress filters directly down into Zonite lungs, into Zonite water. Their children grow up knowing on a cellular level that the law, the enforcers, the council, the entire apparatus of order is not there to protect them. It exists to protect their oppressors and to enforce the exploitation of their labor and their bodies, simultaneously extracting all of the wealth and labor from them while also poisoning them. What a deal. When they resist, they're criminals, and even if they are compliant, they're made to be criminals anyway. Sound familiar? Their suffering literally exists underground, invisible, hidden, literally locked away from polite society. Zon is a thinly veiled metaphor for the margins. And when they finally, after generations of this, react, the reaction becomes the entire story, and that's what Jinx's story is. The cause disappears in the narrative, the wound becomes invisible, hidden by an excuse of intrinsic mental illness, inherent derangement, and all that remains is look at what they did, not what did we do to cause it. But if we pay close attention, that is not actually what the narrative is telling us, even though that is what Piltover is telling us. And this is why my last video ended the way it did. A lot of people took issue with me criticizing the writing and the framework only to kind of go back on that at the end of my video, saying that it's possible that this classist framework that I do hate so much actually might be necessary for the spiritual themes underneath. That maybe the writing only validates the system on the surface, and the true meaning criticizes it. That Jinx's story and the story of Arcane reveals that this was actually not a broken system, and is instead a predatory system working exactly as designed. A system designed to oppress, extract, maintain control, keep weak, sick, and defenseless, and then on top of all of that, scapegoat them and blame them for all the problems that Piltover is actually the one responsible for. Literally Darvo on a systemic level, which if you don't know what Darvo is, we'll get into that later. And I need you to understand that distinction before we talk about everything else, because we're always talking about the broken system, as if these systems were originally built to be functional for every member of society, when in fact they are not, both in this story and in the world at large. What if it's not just a few people in power who have corrupted the system? What if the system itself was always built to extract, built to weaken and poison and then blame the ones that it destroyed? Its very mechanism working exactly as designed.
Get your ass up and work. It seems like nobody wants to work these days. That's so true.
In that case, it brings us to the question, what does heroism actually look like in that world? And what does villainy look like? Because every single thing that happens in this story and everything that Jinx does makes a different kind of sense when you understand what Piltover actually is. But before we answer these questions on a more philosophical level, I want to show you how the structure of the story actually supports my argument. How those who lament that Vi was always the main character and they ruined her and the other characters are completely wrong, based on the actual writing taken at face value, the narrative structure. So before we get into what is heroism or what is villainy or any framework at all, before theory, before interpretation, I want to talk about what the show is doing with the camera, with its craft, with its narrative lens. Because if you look at the choices the writers and directors made from the very start, you begin to see who the story really is about, who the protagonist is right from the beginning of the story, and it's not Vi, it's Powder. The series opens on the violent aftermath of the failed rebellion, and the way that we see that violence, the way it is presented to us, is actually through Powder's perception. We see the first hallucinatory scribble. We hear Powder singing to cope with the traumatic events surrounding her. The chaos of institutional violence is filtered through the consciousness of this small girl who has no framework yet for what she's seeing. This is called subjective framing. The camera is not showing us the raid objectively, it is showing us how it feels to Powder. We are inside her experience from the very first frame, and Powder is the very first face that we see. That carries enormous weight. It signals that this is your entry point into this world. This is whose eyes you will be looking through. And this is further confirmed by the first time we see Vi. We see her through Powder's perspective, her literal eyes. Vi exists in her relation to Powder from her very first moment on screen. I have a hard time believing that this is accidental. The show is establishing the hierarchy hierarchy of perspective before a single word has been spoken. We are not looking at two equally positioned protagonists. We are inside one consciousness looking out at another character. Then the perspective switches to Vi's. Vi is watching Vander's violence, and when they see their dead parents, both reactions are shown, but Powder's reaction sets an interesting precedent. Even though Powder is the small child, she is the one who reaches out to comfort Vi. The one the world would later call a villain is the one who reaches out in kindness to seek connection and to provide comfort, even at such a young age when most children would probably be crying and looking for comfort themselves. And I've seen a way off base analysis say that this is evidence of her psychopathy because she didn't experience a heart-wrenching reaction when she's literally 5 years old, probably doesn't even understand what it means, and is actually showing empathy toward her sister. Y'all need to take some child development classes for real. And it just goes to show how well this series did with imparting this confirmation bias against Jinx and Powder. They established Powder's true character here, loving, caring, attentive. This is the show trying to tell you who Powder actually is underneath everything that's about to happen to her and everything she's going to be labeled to be. And it's part of what makes the show so fascinating. They tell you who this character is, and then the narrative obscures that through a sort of gaslighting and brainwashing that not only Powder and Jinx experiences in the universe, but the audience experiences it as well. But more on that later. While the first line of the show is Vi's, the line that the show is built around is Powder's. Powder sees the airship and she says, "One day I'm gonna ride in one of those things." In screenwriting, this is called the protagonist's desire line, the statement of what the hero wants that becomes the emotional central desire of the entire narrative. Everything that follows is either how that desire is fulfilled or transformed. And what Powder is really expressing here is her desire for freedom. And the final shot of the entire series shows her getting that freedom. It is a direct callback to this very moment. The arc of both seasons, everything Powder becomes and loses and survives and transcends, lives between these two images. Her desire line opened the story, and its fulfillment closes it. And this is the kind of narrative weight that you only give to the main character. And then she stands on the ledge and says, "I'm ready." And the way it's framed with the camera looking up at her and the vast world below, it feels like a moment of significance, a moment of chosen courage before a leap into the unknown. This is what the screenwriters call a hero's declaration, the moment the protagonist formally announces themselves to the story and to the audience. This is your hero telling you who she is before she's ever had a chance to prove it. This is her announcing the start of her journey. And Vi is already down below. She's already capable, already in the world that Powder is going to be jumping into. Vi doesn't need a moment of "I'm ready" because Vi was never the one who had to prove that she belonged. Vi, at least at this point, is the mentor. And the mentor is not usually the hero. The mentor is the hero's first guide. And Vi's entire function in episode 1 is to orient us to Powder's experience of the world. And Vi is also the measuring stick against which Powder's journey becomes visible. In storytelling, there's usually a driving object of the story that lands first, almost always with the protagonist. It is called the MacGuffin transfer, and it is a deliberate craft choice. And you know what it is. If it weren't for that damned sandwich. I mean, who can blame her? It does look like a tasty sandwich. Hextech technology sets every major event of both seasons in motion. People die because of it. Wars are fought over it. I mean, the show is called Arcane for a reason. And who is the person whose hands get on the driving object of the story? That's right. It's Powder. This is telling you that this technology, this conflict, this entire story, it belongs to her. And the story moves forward because of her. It is her getting her hands on this object that causes the events that change their lives forever. And then the street fight breaks out, and even though Vi is the one who is in the action, the camera keeps returning to Powder's face, and instead of seeing the glamorized violence that we're used to seeing in Hollywood, we are not watching the fight through Vi's eyes. We are not feeling satisfaction at every punch. It's raw, unfiltered, even uncomfortable. We are feeling it through her, through the perspective of a terrified and helpless child. And then we get the try-fail cycle. The protagonist attempts something, fails, and the failure reveals something about who they are while raising the stakes for the next attempt. It is almost exclusively used for protagonists because it requires the audience to be genuinely invested in whether or not they succeed. Powder's arc across the first 3 episodes is a try-fail cycle in its most brutal possible form. First, her bomb doesn't work. She loses the treasure trying to defend herself, and that failure reveals everything. She's not a fighter, and her inventions are not ready. She's confirmed to be the liability to the group that Milo keeps saying she is. We see her internalize this message from Milo. We see that she wants to prove herself so desperately. We experience it through her perspective. We feel her anxiety, and we want the monkey bomb to finally work. And then it does, exactly the way she intended, and it destroys everything. Another brilliant writing move from the writers. It sets up this classic Hollywood try-fail cycle and then subverts it by making the success worse than the failure. The cruel irony that the moment her invention finally works is the moment that it cost her everything. That was a deliberate craft choice about whose story this is and how it is a different kind of story. It produces something very specific in the audience. We wanted the monkey bomb to go off. We wanted her to succeed. And then it did, and we felt it. That feeling, that specific gut punch of getting everything you wanted and having it be catastrophic at the same time, only works if the story has successfully made you the protagonist's ally. You cannot manufacture that response with a side character, a villain. The try-fail cycle built your investment without you knowing it, and the subversion of it broke your heart on Powder's behalf. Most Hollywood stories have an implicit contract with the audience. Things will be hard, some people might die, but the protagonists will largely succeed. The good guys will win, and the world will be okay. The end of episode 3 breaks that contract completely. This is called a narrative rupture. The moment the show breaks its own contract and tells you this is not the story you thought it was, and it happens through Powder, her action, her choice, and her bomb. And the writers do something very interesting at this point. Up until episode 3, the narrative of Vi and Powder is kind of intertwined. But after episode 3, they split into 2 contradicting arcs, 2 contradicting narratives. When a narrative splits, the story follows the character whose inner transformation is the most radical one. And that undeniably belongs to Powder. A transformation so complete, she even changes her name. After the time jump and before her reintroduction as Jinx, we hear about her first. Her reputation precedes her. And then she walks through the smoke and says hi before the chaos begins. This is a signature entrance, a single gesture that tells you everything about the character. And even though she walks in with a villainous aura, it's structured like a hero's entrance, not a villain's reveal. A villain's reveal is more like Silco in episode 1 and episode 3. Villains are usually first shown through the damage they have done off screen.
There's worse things than enforcers out there.
Through dread accumulating, through others' characters' fear of them. Heroes get a dramatic entrance where they announce themselves. And what's fascinating about how they introduce Jinx is that she actually gets both. The character's fear surrounding her, the legend, and I'm the protagonist entrance. The show is doing something deliberately complicated here. It's giving us the character narrative machinery of a hero while dressing her in a villain's aesthetic. And that essentially creates a complicated response in the audience. We get people who are rooting for her and people who are not rooting for her. It's just freaking brilliant. And then there's the most sustained and significant craft choice in the entire series. For the entire run of both seasons, we are inside her mind. Arcane relentlessly places us inside Jinx's subjective experience. Her hallucinations are the medium that the story is told through. The show simply shows us what she sees and makes us feel what she feels. They place us inside the perception without pulling us out of it, to the point that many of the scenes are very fantastical, and it actually reminds me of the movie Moulin Rouge. In that movie, the story is Christian's narrative, and in Arcane, it is Jinx's narrative. And the fact that they do this through basically the entire series is an extraordinary craft commitment. The show never fully pulls you out of her subjective experience. It asks you for 18 episodes to live inside a consciousness the world has labeled broken, that the world has labeled a villain, and see what it sees. This is how you frame a character whose inner life is the moral and emotional center of the show. And ironically, this is not how you frame a villain. This is not how you frame a complex antagonist. that a sympathetic villain is usually shown to be sympathetic through the hero's perspective. And if we were to put this entire narrative placement aside for a moment and just assume that Vi is the hero, she loses empathy for Jinx through the series. And the reason that she remains sympathetic no matter what the world has labeled her as is because we are inside her perspective, because she is the main character. Which brings me to the observation that I think contains the entire argument of this video thus far. Vi has the personality of the hero without the narrative placement of it, while Jinx has the personality of the villain with the narrative placement of the hero. The show put the hero's costume on Vi and the hero's camera on Powder and Jinx. And so many people are used to the Hollywoodized version of these stories that all they could see was the costume. So now that we've established that Jinx is structurally the hero, the protagonist of the story, I need to talk about this classic hero template, this Hollywoodized understanding of the hero's journey, which is the biggest reason why people can't see Jinx as the hero, the main character that she is. Because this framework is so deeply internalized, so deeply encoded in how we consume stories that most people don't even know that it's a program running in their mind. And it is precisely the template that Arcane is meant to dismantle. In most especially modern stories, the hero is the one who fights for order, who protects the community, who faces darkness, maybe comes back transformed if we're lucky, and saves the day. Generally, in this Hollywoodized template, the hero is fundamentally in service of making sure the world continues. Think Luke Skywalker restoring the Jedi Order. Think Simba going back to Pride Rock. Think Frodo destroying the ring so the Shire can go back to normal. Whether they go through an inner transformation or not, the hero's ultimate function is to protect the existing order, to make sure the system survives. And the villain is the one who threatens that order, who brings chaos, who operates outside the acceptable boundaries of civilization, who makes the comfortable world feel unsafe. And that template worked for a really long time. It just kind of existed as how we expected stories to be. And while there is a place for it, I would argue that it is not really accurate because it is based on one fundamental assumption. It assumes that the existing order is basically good, where the system is worth protecting because civilization, for all its flaws, is fundamentally on the side of the people living in it. But is that really an accurate representation of the real world? Maybe at some point, but I would argue it hasn't been like that for a really long time. This brings me back to what we established at the beginning of the video. Piltover is not a broken system. It is a predatory system working exactly as designed. And the story of Jinx is Darvo on a systemic level. Darvo is an acronym for Deny, Attack, and Reverse Victim and Offender. It is a manipulation tactic for abusers to avoid accountability. When confronted, the abuser denies the behavior, attacks the accuser, and causes the victim and those around them to doubt reality. Piltover dismisses, denies, and ignores the abuse that they're doing to Zahn. They attack and villainize the one person who openly confronts them and holds them accountable for the destruction they've caused to Zahn, reversing victim and offender by showing her to be the unstable criminal rather than the actual mirror to their own shadow, using the evidence of the victim's reactive abuse as the evidence that they are the perpetrator. But in reality, the order is the source of suffering in this world. The institution is the villain. In this kind of world, the normal, classic type of hero who protects the system isn't actually heroic. They're just useful to the machine. And the villain who threatens that order isn't villainous. They're the only honest response to what that order actually is. The template is dismantled and broken in Arcane, and I would argue it's an actually more honest and more realistic point of view than basically most hero stories we've ever seen. And if you try to apply this classic template to Arcane, you're going to get the wrong answer about who the hero is every single time. Now that we've established all of this, let's look at Vi through this template. Vi fights to protect the order. She even becomes an enforcer, literally the armed fist of the institution that killed her parents. And under the classic hero template, the show frames this as the morally right decision, and it rewards her alignment with the institution as a happily ever after. By the template, Vi is the hero, but I would argue it's a very flattened version of the template, but still the template nonetheless. She completes the journey and lands exactly where the system wanted her to land, as the unquestioning protector of the system, accepting her subordinate role as the dirt under its nails. Is this a happy ending? And is this actually truly the arc of a hero? In contrast, Jinx threatens the order, brings chaos, operates completely outside acceptable societal boundaries. By the classic template, the villain. But here's what I want you to notice. Vi actually never rises out of the status quo, which is the requirement for a true hero. She goes on a journey and she leaves on, yes. She goes through darkness, yes. Is she transformed by it though? Maybe, but not really in a good way. Unless you consider her losing her autonomy to be the system's guard dog a good thing. She comes back and becomes part of the very power structure that defined the ordinary world in the first place, which if you know Campbellian hero's journey theory, you would know that the hero is meant to transcend the ordinary world and come back with something new. That's why I called Vi an anti-hero in the beginning of the video, because she quite literally has this inverted hero's arc, or maybe more precisely, a false hero's arc. She is actually the character whose choices illuminate the protagonist, which is Jinx, by contrast. Vi illuminates that the hero's journey has a flawed foundation, that in a world that is built on corruption, it just doesn't work. And Jinx's arc, by contrast, shows us that true heroism on the deepest spiritual level is something that breaks the template completely, something I'm going to be getting into in my next few videos. But what I know for sure is that Jinx is the main character. She is the protagonist. The show positioned Powder as the protagonist from its very first frame. It gave her the desire line, the MacGuffin, the inciting incident, the try-fail cycle, the narrative rupture, the subjective camera, and the hallucinations that the audience lives inside, the signature entrance, and even the hero's declaration on the ledge. And then the writers dressed her in the villain's aesthetic and watched how the audience responded. And what happened is most people looked at the costume through this classic hero lens that doesn't apply to this story, even when the writers gave every craft signal available that this is your protagonist. And they experimented with what happens when the label precedes the evidence. Jinx as the problem, unstable, chaotic, the villain, was applied before the evidence was examined, and then the evidence got arranged around the conclusion. That mechanism, the conclusion determining the reading, is not just how the fandom reads Jinx, it's what the story is actually about. It is what Piltover has done to Zon. It is what the system does to people it needs to call monsters, so it never has to reckon with what it actually is, which I would argue is exactly how the world works. And Arcane hid this most radical argument, this most revolutionary perspective in plain sight. And most people missed it because the framework they were using was the one the story was trying to dismantle. And before you tell me, the writers didn't mean it that way. Christian Link literally described the central question of Arcane as, can we forgive a monster? In reference to Jinx.
A person, like Jinx, deserve a second chance. Can a monster ever be forgiven?
Is it possible that instead of actually thinking that Jinx is the monster, that he is recognizing that it's how most people would see her? I'm gonna say something rather shocking, okay? You ready for it? It's gonna sound like blasphemy to a lot of you. It doesn't matter what the writers say. Feel free to tell me how off my rocker I am in the comments. And I'll explain why in my next few videos, but this video is getting far too long. So we've already established her as the main character, the hero, the protagonist in this video, but in the next video, we're going to be exploring why she's never been a villain, exactly what Jinx did and didn't do through an objective lens, what being a villain under this framework actually looks like, and what insanity actually is in an insane world. And I think by the end of it, you're not going to be able to call her a villain anymore. So follow me there for the rest of my argument.
Jinx and Vi being Italian makes so much sense to me, specifically American Italian, because as a spicy white American Italian myself, I can see another one from a mile away. Because it's like, it's the family, it's loyalty, right? It's those intense emotions, and when it goes bad, right, it turns into, you betrayed me. family, you're dead to me. This isn't to stereotype anyone. This is just for fun. I'm just playing around, okay? It's just a little entertainment, so chill out.